So before we get started, I just want to kind of get an idea of where everybody's at. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, need a little bit of hand raising, which you guys are used to already. If you own some Bitcoin, would you raise your hand? Don't worry, I'm not a hacker. Okay. If you own some Ether, the currency of Ethereum. All right. If you hold your cryptocurrency on an exchange, such as Coinbase, Poloniex, Kraken, any exchange, you hold it on an exchange, right? If you hold it on a private wallet, raise your hand. Okay. So some of what I'm going to talk about today will be a little bit over the top. Some of it will be overly simplistic for some of you. But I'll try to keep it as down to earth as possible so that we can have some healthy discussion about it at the end. And for starters, I thought it would be helpful to kind of demystify blockchain a little bit. As we all know, blockchain was created with the introduction of Bitcoin back in 2009. What less of us know is that it was actually in direct response to the centralization problem with the central banking. It was right after the 2008 financial crisis, and Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, was frustrated with a system that rewarded the bad actors while punishing the general users, the economy, right? And he proposed an idea that would remove the need for a central party that has too much power. Because naturally, as we know, absolute power corrupts and that sort of thing. If you have friends that you need to reward with your position and so on. So you wanted to create a system that would allow us to transact and make payments and so on without a third party in the middle that has too much power, right? But cryptocurrencies have been around much longer than that. Most people, when they think about blockchain, they think about cryptocurrencies, they think about virtual currency. But all of that already existed. In fact, the first computer was created to solve a cryptographic problem. Now, it wasn't a virtual currency, but the moment that computers reached critical mass, 1983, there were already attempts to create a virtual currency. Soon after that, in 1997, Adam Back created Hashcash, which introduced a mathematical way of proving transactions, which would resist DOS attacks, right, and spam. Later after that, there were several other attempts by Nick Szabo, Wei Dai, sorry. But it wasn't until 2009, as I described, with the frustration of the centralized system, that Bitcoin was created that was the first currency that removed the need for trust. And it did this using a piece of technology that we're all very familiar with, but understand very little about, myself included, right? Blockchain is essentially a database. It's a database with two very simple rules that allow us to solve infinitely complex problems. One, it is append only, meaning you can't edit something that's been entered, you can't remove it, you can only add to the database. And two, it's distributed, meaning that it's hosted on thousands of computers and anybody can be a host or a node, as they call it in the blockchain world, of that entire database, right? This removes the need for trust in a third party because Satoshi Nakamoto, even though we don't know who he is, has no control over this platform because he can't go in and change the code, he can't go in and change the ledger to give himself more money, he can't manipulate it in any way because the rest of the nodes would reject that false transaction, right? Around the same time, another gentleman by the name of Vitalik Buterin was experiencing some problems with centralization of his own. I'll read his quote in his own words. "I happily played World of Warcraft during 2007 to 2010, but one day Blizzard removed the damage component from my beloved Warlock Siphon life spell. I cried myself to sleep on that day. I realized what horror centralized services can bring." This is comical, but it is true. Somebody was manipulating his world, right? Because they had ultimate power, too much power in one hand. Fast forward a few years, he goes on to create the world's first decentralized virtual machine with smart contracts on it. Smart contracts are computer programs that run in a blockchain much the same way that the currency that we were describing earlier runs, right? It's immutable. You can't go in and manipulate it. If you create a platform that doesn't charge a fee, you can't go in and manipulate the system and change it to a fee extracting platform because the rest of the nodes would reject it, right? Is everybody following so far? one of the problems with centralization is evident in the story of Uber. Most people know the story of Uber. Backtrack to 2011. Uber raised a ton of money. They were able to incentivize a lot of drivers to come on board and start driving with them, and the sharing economy was born, right? Except for it wasn't so sharing. Eventually, Uber hiked up the fees to 25% to where drivers get below minimum wage, and that's before you account for depreciation of their vehicles, the fact that they don't have benefits, and so on, right? So the few individuals in the middle, it's not just Uber. Any of the centralized business models, you have a few individuals in the middle that walk away with billions of dollars. You get examples like Mark Zuckerberg, where they sell your data, for example, and they walk away with billions of dollars, right? But in the evolution of industries, we see a move away from centralized systems like this to decentralized. In the old days, we had monarchies where one person or a few individuals had too much power, and eventually democracies, you have a move in communications from telephone to internet, right? Publishing to blogging, and as we just discussed, from banking to Bitcoin. And blockchain has accelerated this, this evolutionary tendency with a number of projects that are already in existence and already being used. So a lot of us, when we think of blockchain, we think of pie-in-the-sky projects, but there are actually projects that work today, such as Brave, which is a decentralized browser, Storage, which competes with Dropbox and Google Drive, but instead of storage owning your information and hosting it on their servers, it's on thousands of nodes and you own it, right? Because of the subject matter of this conference and the audience today, we're going to be looking at travel, which is the project that I'm working on. I'm one of the founders of Winding Tree. Winding Tree is not another app, it's not a corporation, it's a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit that is open source. There's no intellectual property. There's no equity. There is nothing owned by any of the founders. It's completely a community project. Now, the problem that Winding Tree is trying to solve is the problem of centralization in travel distribution. So we come from the outside as an innovator with years of experience trying to build applications in the travel space and running into the problems with legacy systems. Problems of double marginalization, gatekeepers keeping you from getting to the data that you need to be able to truly innovate in the travel industry and see the exciting stuff that we want to see with all that data, right? And our mantra at Winding Tree that drives us is, without open data, we can't have permissionless innovation. And this is true in so many ways. If you look at a lot of the really disruptive technology that's evolved, most of it has come from independent entrepreneurs, startups, open source projects, and not necessarily from major corporations, right? And that's what we're trying to help to solve. So with the current travel ecosystem, an innovator has to go and they have to knock on a bunch of doors, and they'll be turned down because maybe they don't have critical mass, but you can't have critical mass unless you have, the chicken and the egg problem. And because Winding Tree is non-profit, it never extracts a single penny from the users to itself, and it's open source. There are no fees for transacting to Winding Tree, right? So a supplier, such as an airline or a hotel, can list their inventory on there. They have full ownership of their inventory. It doesn't belong to Winding Tree, it belongs to the supplier. And any innovator can access that and sell that inventory or use that data to create personalization tools so that you open up the market for true competition like never before. And we actually have innovators already, over 150, who have started to build onto Winding Tree with projects in vacation rental space on the demand side or in the corporate hotel booking space. This is from an existing company that's building a tool onto our platform for corporate hotel bookings. And this is the cost saving they're promising of 20% after they take their own cut, as well as account for the cost of transacting on the blockchain. Now, I know earlier I said there's no transaction fee to Winding Tree, but there is a transaction fee for decentralization. There is a decentralization cost of using a public blockchain, which is the gas, what they call, right? You're paying for the hosting on those thousands of computers, and it's fractional compared to the commission fees paid today to OTAs and GDSs and so on, but even that is being reduced drastically. So we're built on Ethereum network, which is the biggest public blockchain. And there are a number of developments underway at Ethereum, like Casper, that will speed things up, make things cheaper, zero knowledge proof, ZK snarks, which allows you to verify if somebody's a real person without actually giving away any of the information, right? The personally identifiable information, which is really beautiful. But in the meantime, these are developments that are in the works but haven't yet been realized. Winding Tree uses what's called state channels, so that you don't have to pay for every single transaction. As you can imagine, especially with dynamic pricing, you have lots of state changes, and that can start to sound costly. So instead of paying for a transaction every single time, we put those transactions on a state channel, which is a direct connection between the supplier and the demand side. And then once you have a block of transactions, it could be thousands of state changes, thousands of transactions, it would then be uploaded to the public blockchain, right? So it bypasses the cost, speeds things up, and makes life a lot easier. We already have a number of partners on board, Lufthansa, Air New Zealand, Nordic Choice. These aren't early investors. In fact, there were never bonuses given to anybody or equity, like I mentioned at the beginning. These are just users on a decentralized platform, similar to the way that we're all users of the internet today, right? The project is completely funded by the community. So there was no VC firms, there's no companies that own anything. 1,000 participants contributed $1.5 million last summer, and that helped to kickstart the project. And just now in February, we ran an ICO that raised $14 million, and all community people. It was amazing to see the thousands of travel professionals that wanted to see a change in the space, supporting the project to make this a reality. Now, distribution is one way that travel could be impacted with blockchain technology, but there's also other areas like loyalty. Loyalty is very easy to do on blockchain without fees. Payments, identity management, unique global identifier for hotels, for example, and that's just the beginning. But I wanted to close with this before we get into questions. Now, if you think that if you think that blockchain is just a bunch of hot air and hype, would you raise your hand? If you think that it's technology that's here, this is my crowd. If you think that it's technology, okay, good. If you think it's technology that's here to stay, would you raise your hand? So my opinion is that it's both. It is insanely overhyped. It's all over the news for the wrong reasons. You have people throwing their life savings at crypto because they saw Paris Hilton talking about it on TV. You have corporations slapping the word blockchain into their products and making millions off of it, even though it's just a traditional private database and so on. But the underlying technology is here to stay. And if you look back at the 90s dot-com bubble, most of us think about the horrible trillions of dollars of valuations lost. But in reality, the dot-com bubble is where some of the biggest technologies today, such as Google and Amazon, emerged, right? Those technologies were here to stay, and it's not like websites died, right? And I think that there is a lot of noise, a lot of trash out there, but the decentralized model that I've described to you today was not possible prior to blockchain technology. You could not have a business that's not for profit that actually fixes a problem and is completely monopoly proof. And that's why people are so excited about the currencies. It's this decentralization factor. So my name is Pedro Anderson. I would love to talk to any of you more about decentralization and blockchains. And yeah, I'd love to open the floor up for questions. I can simplify it. So let's say we wanted to create a currency in this room. We wanted to create our own EyeforTravel economy, right? The way that we would do this is we would grab a piece of paper, and me being on Wall Street and having a background in cryptocurrencies, I would hold this piece of paper. I'd write down, Vladka wants to send Leo $3. I would deduct $3 from Vladka, add $3 to Leo, right? And that's how banking works today. Now, there are some problems with that. in that what if somebody steals this ledger from me, makes some changes on it, and puts it back? Or what if I'm an evil guy and I start to manipulate this, or I start to lend people money that doesn't exist, which starts to ring a bell. It's kind of what goes on in the central banking system today. Now, what blockchain is, instead of having Pedro hold the ledger, and everybody trusts Pedro because he's a good guy, we put a stack of pages in the middle and we say, hey, anybody who wants can go record all the transactions. And every time you have a transaction, instead of whispering it to Pedro, you yell it out. Pedro is sending $3 to Tom, and everyone writes it down, right? And so when there's a false transaction that's entered on somebody's paper, Pedro starts saying that he has $1 million. Everyone else's paper will not say that because it's a false transaction. So Pedro's transaction will be removed. And that's what makes blockchain kind of exciting. It's the fact that you can remove the need for trust in that middleman, right? And when it comes to technology, it means that your system runs on rules that everybody can see and everybody can make sure that we're not cheating.
Was there a question in the back? Go ahead.
All right, so I have two questions. The first being most of these cryptocurrencies they're seen as like an investment opportunity, right? Sort of like stocks and stuff like that. That's why they're volatile. So how can you guarantee them being used as a medium of buying tickets, for example? Yeah, they're always
That's a very good question. So the volatility, and if you're on demand side and you're buying from a supplier, who takes that risk and so on. There are several solutions that you can use that are currently being used in other areas of blockchain. So for example, the demand side can pay a little bit extra just in case there's some kind of fluctuation during the transaction. And then you would just credit that so that in the whatever you paid over, if it ended up not dipping like you expected, that amount would just be accredited to you, right? So you can play with it. And there's also a lot of effort being put into creating stable coins, which could be a solution as well. But if you consider the cost savings to what we're paying now for distribution, it's fractional, yeah.
It's not dependent on cryptocurrency, is it? I mean, you could actually have a blockchain built on dollars. No?
Yeah, Tether is a blockchain built on dollars, and it's kind of having trouble right now.
Huh.
It is a cryptocurrency.
Okay.
It's a utility token that you use to make these purchases. It allows for you to save a lot on forex fees, SWIFT fees, all that kind of stuff. It's all bypassed. Okay. So it's much cheaper than transacting with anything we're doing now. You don't have to go through a clearinghouse, all that.
Vlatka?
Mm-hmm.
It almost seems that then this is finally now happening, that you're exchanging for potential goods. Like, is this happening, or is this in the works? Or?
So we have a hotel product. We don't have an airline product yet. We're still working on it together with airline partners. We have a hotel product. It's in alpha stage. And what I mean by that is it's layer one, what they call in the blockchain space, which means that every single state change you pay the transaction fee on. Like it goes as a regular transaction on Ethereum blockchain, which is a little slow and a little expensive, right? But it is testable. And we have a corporate client which does a lot of travel, a tech company, and they tested it together with our hotels with imaginary ether on the testnet, and they're happy with it, even despite the fact that there might be some volatility and so on, because the cost saving is so great compared to what they're paying now.
Yeah?
I was disappointed that the U.S. couldn't participate in the ICO.
It wasn't our fault. It's that the regulation here in the U.S. is so ambiguous, right? So it's designed to be unclear so that when there is somebody who's manipulating the market in some way, they can catch you, right? But because of that, it also makes it very difficult for ICO projects. So we did it in Europe, where it's a little bit friendlier to this type of technology. But yeah, now that was for the ICO only. Now American companies can get involved as well. Yeah.
Pedro, let's take the first one up there. What do you envision as a future state for booking systems?
So the winding tree and the blockchain technology piece is not the consumer-facing part at all. So anybody can come. Like I mentioned, there were 150 companies, entrepreneurs, and developers building onto the platform. The community builds the consumer-facing part, and they compete openly, right? Because there's no backdoor deals. I mean, you can do special pricing for government and so on, and you can give special rates to travel agents that you like, but you would do that on the blockchain. But there's no monopolizing effect of I have control over this inventory, nobody else has access to it, right? But anybody from the outside can build onto our platform, the consumer-facing side. We never do that because that would give us too much control. And our vision is to reduce the amount of influence that the founders have. Right now, we're 10 full-time staff, 7 contractors. We're hiring about 10 more developers because we have to build this out. But what we're trying to do is make it an open source project that the community sustains. And we already have open source contributions, so it's not pie in the sky. Some of the airlines that we're working with, they're contributing developers. There's open source community developers that just like the project and are contributing code. And the idea is for it to be self-sustaining moving forward, and we would recede in influence over the platform. The travel companies on the platform would govern it and grow it. Or would you build a DApp on top of winding trees?
You want to do the second one? Can you explain it too?
No, you would just build an app onto Winding Tree. You wouldn't build a DApp on top of it, yeah? And do forks affect other markets as they do with cryptocurrencies? I don't see forks affecting Winding Tree because we're built on Ethereum, and Ethereum's pretty big. It's much more stable than a lot of the other ones. But that being said, we're blockchain agnostic, so we're not stuck on any one blockchain. We can actually move, and we're doing, you saw there was a logo for RSK, which is Rootstock, which is a company, a project that's building smart contracts on top of Bitcoin, which is really exciting. So we're testing with them as well. So we're open to other faster blockchains, but we're sticking with Ethereum as the best bet right now. Does this have the potential to be the new gold standard? I mean, Bitcoin, what is that question directed at? What is this?
I guess replace, I guess it ends up being the new currency, right? That dominates everything.
So LIF, which is a token of the Winding Tree platform, is to be used for travel bookings, yes, but I would say that the gold standard in the crypto community or for virtual currencies is Bitcoin.
Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Right there.
Oh.
If blockchain is transparent, why do different platforms frequently display different Bitcoin values? Those are exchanges, and the exchanges, they list the price based on demand and supply, and so that impacts the prices, right? Right now, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange is they're doing Bitcoin futures, and they have a pretty good criteria for which exchanges to look at for pricing that prevent bots from messing around with the pricing. Because you can create bots that would buy and sell at the right times to influence the price in your favor on weaker exchanges. But if you go to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, you can see the exchanges that they base theirs on. Have you heard of Pillar Project? No, I haven't.
Boy.
What will happen to all these aggregated middlemen? So there's a good example of that was back in the 90s when the internet was exploding. Phone companies were actually worried that it would kill their long distance fees that they charged, right? They thought, Pedro's not going to be able to pay us when he calls his grandma in Oregon anymore. This is horrible. But over time, they realized that one, the internet was here to stay, and two, that maybe long distance calls to your grandma wasn't exactly the best business model. And they actually started charging for data, and they're much more profitable now than they were in those days. So I don't see, some of the companies, depending on what your business model is, if it's rent extracting, the rent extracting business practices definitely will diminish greatly. But a lot of the current middlemen provide other valuable contributions technologically, right? So if you look at GDSs, for example, there's a lot that they do besides extracting rent on distribution transactions. You see government stepping in?
Okay, this will be the last one. The government stepping in?
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't see it as a problem to projects like Winding Tree, for example, because of the fact that the biggest problem that the government sees with ICOs specifically is the promise of future revenue, right? That's one of the biggest problems they take, the biggest issues they take with ICOs. You're telling everybody in the room, hey guys, I have this special deal for you. You're going to buy my token. It's going to 100x after ICO, first of all. And then 3 years from now, I'm going to have revenues of 100 million, right? And then obviously that most of those won't actually have true return on investment. And so you have a problem there because you're deceiving people. Winding Tree is a non-for-profit, and it's been clear from the beginning. We complied with all of the regulations. We do not classify as a security. So we're not concerned with regulatory changes. Yeah.
All right. Well, very good, Pedro. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow.